Hi, this is Jocelyn with Jocelyn Crafts, and this week I'm going to teach you how to make some woven pouches, which you can use to carry devices, or you could make a glasses carrier or a water bottle carrier, all sorts of fun things that you can do with this project. These pouches were made to fit a cell phone and a tablet, and it is a super easy craft. But it does take some setup, so I will explain the whole process and get you going on this fun craft. For supplies, you will need a sturdy piece of cardboard like from a shipping box, scissors, a tapestry needle, tape, yarn, any kind of yarn, thicker is better, and optionally buttons or snaps. I almost forgot to add, you will also need a ruler. Start by measuring your object and then cutting your cardboard loom. The cardboard needs to be 1 inch wider than the object and 1 to 3 inches taller than your object, and I will explain why in a minute. Then along one end of the loom, you need to mark out with a pen or a pencil, marks every 1/4 inch. And then you will start cutting those marks. So go ahead and cut them all. And this is only on one end. And you will also make, just on one side of this, one last cut that is 1/8 of an inch from the end. Here I am demonstrating how the yarn will flow. It's going to wrap around the bottom, then back up to those tabs that you cut. It'll loop around a tab, and then go back down the same side to the bottom, then loop around again to the next, to go around that same tab again from the other direction. So you're going to be fully encircling the tab. Then you go up and you skip a tab and go to the next tab after that. And you'll see me demonstrating this. And you want enough slots cut that you will have an odd number of strings on one side and an even number of strings on the other side. This is what's called warping your loom. The fixed threads or strings are called the warp. So start with the slot that's 1/8 of an inch from the edge and tape just a little end down. Then go to the first full-size tab and circle around it. Then come all the way down and up around the other side. Now circle around that same tab. Now you'll skip the next tab, so you're going to be circling every other tab. What we're doing is we're making a warp that will allow you to just continuously weave a bag all the way around the outside of this piece of cardboard and easily remove it. So you circle all the loops around the same tabs from both sides, and you do every other tab, and you can nudge the little warp threads to evenly space them as you go. And again, you keep going until the end, and you want an even number of threads on one side of the board and an odd number of threads on the other side of the board. This was a cell phone sized board, and I have, in the end, 16 threads on one side and 15 threads on the other, as I will be showing you in just a minute. So here I am spacing out the warps. They don't have to be perfectly even, but you want to get the warp threads fairly even so that you have a consistent looking weave. Okay, now I'm finishing my final wrap and taping down my last end, and it is getting taped down on the side with 15 strings, so the 2 loose ends are taped down on the side with the odd number, which should be a lesser number. And then you just trim off the excess length beyond where your tape is. And the tape just has to be strong enough to hold for a little while. It doesn't have to be like super strong tape. You don't want to use duct tape for this. Now I'm counting. I'm counting to confirm that I do have that 15 on that side and then the 16 on the other. And it can be any even and odd number as long as they work well together. One last tip for sizing your cardboard. If you're using a thick object like glasses or a bottle of water, you want to measure the circumference of it, divide the circumference by 2, and add 1 inch to that to get the width for your weaving. This is a chart of standard yarn sizes. For this project, you want to use something in the 4, 5, and 6 range. 7 would be too big, and 2, 1, and 0 is definitely too small. Most of the yarn you find at big box stores is sizes 4, 5, and 6. Here I'm showing you the difference between a size 6 yarn and a size 3 yarn. For my bigger pouch, I did use a size 3 yarn, but that's because I'm a grown-up who has a lot of patience. If you don't have a lot of patience, you want to use a 5 or a 6. So I'm using a size 6 for this demonstration pouch. As you can see, I go under one string and over the next. Under one string and over the next. When you pull it through to start, you leave a little tail. Now leave a hump. Don't pull it tight. Squash it down with a comb or a fork or something like that. Because if you pull it tight across, in the end, your pouch is going to shrink up way too much. By doing that hump, that mound, and then pushing it down with a fork, you make sure that there's enough slack in there that your pouch will stay the size you want it to instead of tightening up. And so you can see I'm going to do this on every row, under 1, over 1. I'll leave that arc or that hump and then push it down with the fork. On this first row, you don't have to get all the way to the very bottom. You just get nice and close so you only see a tiny bit of the cardboard. And if you have it correctly set up with odd on one side and even on the other side, it will be naturally set up for each row to be the opposite going around. You just keep circling around the cardboard, going under 1, over 1, under 1, over 1. As you turn the cardboard, you will keep the same under-over pattern. And if you lose track of whether you're supposed to be going under or over, look at the last string that you did, because you're going to do opposite of what you did in the last row. So I'm just following that same pattern, doing the opposite of what I did in the previous row, pulling it through, leaving that arc or that hump, and pushing it down with the fork. Eventually, when you get to a spot where you run out of yarn, but you haven't finished filling your loom yet, you haven't finished making your whole pouch, what you do is you cut a new length of yarn, and the last little tail end of your first stretch of yarn, you're going to overlap it with the very beginning of the new yarn. And they're going to follow the same under-over pattern. So they'll be going through as if they were weaving the exact same row. And it will make that row a little bit thicker, but once you have it all smushed down with the fork, you're not really hardly going to notice it. Alternately, you could stop and start yarns at the very edge of the pouch and just have your ends sticking out the edge. Now, as you do these overlaps, you are going to have little ends of the yarn that are still going to be loose, just leave those sticking out, because one of our very last steps is we're going to turn these pouches inside out. So if you leave the little fuzzy ends on just sticking out wherever they are, then they'll be turned to the inside so you don't have to see them. Here I switched to a different color of yarn to add some interest. You can use multiple yarns. This one I believe is a size 3 yarn, but I used a triple strand of it so that it would be as thick as that size 6 yarn. See those little ends sticking out? That's where my threads ended and I started new yarns. And just leave them sticking out. We'll trim them a little bit shorter and then we'll turn it all inside out at the end so that those are not visible from the outside, because those would be ugly. But do keep doing the hump and the smush all the way up your board. So on this pouch, I decided I wanted to make a button flap. So that's what I'm going to start demonstrating now. You finish on one side, and then I did a little thing where I secured it under the previous row right there, but you don't have to do that. That's optional. So now I'm only going to weave on one side of the board because I'm going to make this a button flap. So now instead of circling around the board, I'm just going back in the opposite direction on the same side to make this button flap. Now there's something you have to watch for. I pulled it too tight. You want it to still be looping right at the edge of your board. So you want to keep it a little bit loose right there on those edge loops. You don't want to pull it so it comes in tight. So I'm going to be a little more careful on this other side and make sure that I keep that end loop a little bit looser so that it doesn't pull in tight. And here, as I'm weaving, I'm just periodically checking how high my flap is getting in comparison to the other side so that I can position a buttonhole. And I'm about to show you how to make a buttonhole. And there I have made it, the flap, long enough that I'm ready to do a buttonhole. So this is the side with 16 strands of warp. When you do a buttonhole and you want it centered, you have to do it on the side that has the even number of threads. So right now I have switched and I am only weaving back and forth between 8 threads. And again, you have to be careful how tight you pull it. You want it to be very consistent there along the slot where there's going to be the buttonhole so that it forms a nice sturdy buttonhole. And I am going to go back and forth 3 times. That means a total of 6 rows to give us a nice sized buttonhole. And then I'll show you how to do the other side of the flap in just a second. Okay, this is the full depth that I want my buttonhole to be. So now I'm going to go back across, weaving the full way across to sort of close up the end of that buttonhole. And then I'm going to weave back down the other side of the buttonhole. So now instead of weaving up, I'm going to be weaving down. And I want to make those 6 rows or back and forth 3 times so that it matches the other side of the buttonhole and the whole flap stays symmetrical. And we'll mush both up and down to get it nice and even. So if you want to make a button flap, you need to have your loom be 2.5 to 3 inches taller than your object, and mark a spot where you want to stop weaving on the one side but keep weaving on the other. So like measure just a little bit above where your phone or your tablet or whatever will end so that you can know where to stop on that one side. This method to make a buttonhole, you could also use to make slots for a drawstring bag. If you wanted to make a drawstring bag, again, you would want your loom to be 2.5 to 3 inches taller, or even 4 inches, depending on what you want the final look to be, taller than your object. And then you would make slots like this, only probably a little bit smaller, probably 3 or 4 slots on each side of your loom. And those would then become the slots that you can run your drawstrings through. So you can use the same cardboard loom method to do a drawstring bag. So now I'm going up through those looser edges. I'm pulling the yarn up through the loops of the already woven yarn, and then just neatening up with my fork, and then I'm going to finish out the top edge of my button flap. As you get to the top of your loom, it's going to get tighter and tighter, and you might only be able to do 1 or 2 warp threads at a time, and that's fine. And you won't be able to do your arc or your hump anymore. Again, that's fine too. Just don't pull it too tight. Keep a tiny bit of slack in it and still smoosh it down. Okay, I'm on my last row here. It's really tight. And I'm going to go down the yarn loops at the other side of the button flap. That one warp thread was the taped side and it came loose. Sorry for the bad camera angle here. You'll get to see it in just a sec. So I'm going back down those yarn loops on the side of the flap. Now leave a long tail here. You're going to want it. But now is the time where you start taking your item off the loom. Just securing the yarn so that it's where I want it to be. Now, you just start popping those warp loops off of the tabs. Just pop, 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 pop. It's as easy as that, but there is a little more finishing to come after this. So if you got to have your scissors handy and cut those loops so that you have single threads. That's step 1. Don't cut any of the yarn that you wove with, but don't worry about anything unraveling right now. It's not going to. And here you can also start trimming up those little fuzzies that are still sticking out. Don't cut them all the way off, but you can cut them nice and short. Then take those warp threads and tie 2 or 3 of them together. Just tie little square knots, something nice and sturdy that will stay in place. And just go all the way across and make sure that all of them have been tied. And after you tie them all, you have a couple options. You could just go through and trim them short, or if you have a crochet hook with a small head, you could thread it through and pull those loose threads of the knotted warps back down through your weaving to just make it extra secure, and then you could cut it shorter from there. But if you tie a nice tight knot, it's okay to just cut the strings loose if you don't have a crochet hook. And now is the time where you can take it off of the loom. Just make sure your warps are untaped, and then you roll it outside in. So the outside becomes the inside, inside becomes the outside, and you've got a nice little pouch. There's still a little finishing to do. Those taped warp beginning and ending, you're going to have to trim those off. And then there's a few little loosies and bumpies right up there along the edge. And so that's why I kept the long yarn here. So I just like to do a little whip stitch where I just circle over the top, go down slightly under the top and into the inside, and then circle back around, all the way around that rim, going in between each warp thread, and it just sturdies up that top edge and makes it a little bit nicer and a little bit more finished. And once you're done with that, you can just weave a little bit of your yarn onto the inside of the bag and cut it short. Next, I'm going to show you how to make this nice braided strap. This is the one that I have on the bigger bag that I made. And now we're going to make one for this little pouch. And it's just a 3-stranded braid. Hopefully you know how to do a 3-stranded braid. I'm not going to teach you how to do a 3-stranded braid here, but you could also crochet a strap if you know how to crochet. But this is one that even little kids could do if you teach them quick and easy a 3-stranded braid. You want to take the 3 individual strands that are going to make up your braid and pull them through at the edge where you want the strap to attach from the outside to the inside. You want them to all be right next to each other, but not pulled through the exact same hole. This will anchor your strap more securely in your bag. If they're all through the same hole, it would be easier for that hole to widen and for the strap or the handle to pull out. So go through slightly different holes right near each other with all 3 of your strands. Once they're all through, you want to even the ends out. Just give it a little tug and even them out. And then do a nice simple overhand knot there. Just a little knot. Pull it nice and tight. And that knot should be big enough, and because it's all through different holes, that it will not pull out. I put a big weight on here. You could get a big book or a thing of coins like I've got, or any other heavy thing, and just start doing a 3-stranded braid. And you do that until you have your desired length. You want to cut your lengths of yarn for this longer than you think you want your strap to be, because it will shrink a little bit. Once you have it to the length that you want it to be, you just thread it through the way you did at the beginning. Each strand individually through the spot where you want it to anchor, but not quite through the same hole. Just through spots that are right adjacent to each other. And again, once they're all through, you pull it nice and tight so the braid is up against the outside of the bag, and you do your little knot and pull that nice and tight against the inside of the bag. You can use your needle as a little anchor to help get that knot slid down right to the edge of the bag. and then cut off those long strands. And then you've got your fun little bag strap all ready to go. At this point, if you made a flap, you can sew on the button to line up with the buttonhole. Now I'm showing you the finishing of this bigger bag so that you can see how to take one off that doesn't have a button flap. Exactly the same principle, but even easier because you're not going to have to tie any knots. You just start popping all of those loops off of the tabs all the way around. And once you have all of them off, the warp just sort of shrinks down to where your woven yarn is and kind of evens out. Okay, and then once again you do the inside to the outside so that your smoother side is facing out. You trim your last little warp threads, stretch it out, get it looking nice. And then once again, after you have all those warp threads nicely trimmed, you use your long strand left over and just do a simple whip stitch around the top. And again, if you know crochet, you could do a chain stitch or a single crochet border along the top also. That would be very attractive. But the easiest is just this nice simple whip stitch. And then when you're all done, you can do your optional finishing. You could put on snaps or sew on a button if you did a button flap, or make some cords to be your drawstrings if you did a drawstring bag. Now here's how you thread that final loose end in. You just sort of go under the visible weaving and it will get sucked right in there where the warp string is and be hidden. And that is all there is to it. You have some beautiful woven bags. Thank you so much for crafting with me, and I hope you can make some fun bags with your new skill to use these simple cardboard looms. It's as easy as can be, and I hope you enjoy it. Have fun crafting. Bye-bye.